Welcome to our panel on elevating access, funding the future of healthcare. Very happy to be here taking the floor with our speakers for today. We're going to start with some quick remarks and then get to the Q&A, and hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes at the end for questions. So as you all know, the healthcare systems in the UAE and the region have already embarked on a transformation journey over the past few years. And COVID-19, yes, we still talk about it, has actually accelerated this transformation. It also led to better coordination between the private and the public sectors, and also expedited the adoption of digital health solutions that promise to improve access, reduce cost, and also support some new models of care for the future. Well, these models, we can describe them in so many ways, but they are meant to make care more accessible and equitable, holistic, cost-effective, integrated, patient-centric, and most importantly, deliver value for the population, regulators, payers, and providers. And this panel, we're going to talk about the future of healthcare investments in healthcare delivery, in health tech solutions, also in the biotech space, and shed light on the role of the private sector. I'm going to start with the first question with Dr. Mohamad. As you know, the sector in the UAE has undergone some major restructuring lately, especially in Abu Dhabi. Where do you see the role of the private sector moving forward, and how do we continue on the path of collaboration between the public and private sector?
Thank you, Sara. Pleasure to be here with everyone. To your point in the introduction, the significance of a symbiotic relationship between the public and the private sector has been exponentiated, especially after COVID. In terms of collaboration and cooperation, a lot has happened in the past, specifically in this region, but there's still a lot more to come that we need to acknowledge. On the former, I believe that if you take the main objective over the last 15 years has been provide accessibility to healthcare and enhance the quality of services being provided. And to acknowledge the achievements of the public sector, it has managed to lay down the right foundation to attract investments into this sector. It has published guidelines, it has published data around the needs and the gaps of the requirement where investments should follow, in addition to defining a mandatory health insurance and so on and so forth. All of which resulted in attracting the private sector that has contributed significantly to the growth and the development of healthcare in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi specifically. That said, there's still a lot more to come. Today, while we believe we continue to focus on access and quality, I think we all have a duty as a private and public sectors to manage the healthcare bill. And to manage the healthcare bill, it's important to capitalize on the successes that have taken place so far, rather than duplicate them, and provide visibility and clarity on where are the sectors that are unmet in terms of needs, specifically in the life sciences front and the biopharma front, in terms of building local capabilities in areas under healthcare that are still untapped or relatively untapped. So I think now more than ever, we require to build more trust between public and private, building on the previous successes, but looking on how can we collaborate further. And Abu Dhabi, I think, is a fertile ground as a market to achieve such an objective.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamad. I think one of the key areas where the private sector has invested heavily, especially during the COVID era, is in health startups, especially around personalized mobile apps, telehealth. Sacha, from your experience in the region, how do you see these startups reshaping the delivery of healthcare moving forward?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you so much for having me. I think that the first iteration of telehealth was sort of happened during COVID, right? So there's a pandemic, and everyone suddenly in, shocked that this has happened, and we migrate to this world where we suddenly see there's like some very glaring gaps in healthcare provision, not just for this region, but globally, right? And I think that telehealth sort of became a buzzword, and we saw pan-globally doctor booking platforms and these video conferencing platforms suddenly garnered a lot of attention as a way for doctors to connect with their patients while everybody was at home, right? And I think that since the dust has settled, we're kind of seeing a different iteration of telehealth and healthcare startups come up across the region. I think here it's important to set the context. I think we operate and live in a market where there is significant government and top-down support for digital transformation, which a lot of countries don't benefit from. Like, we invest across the Middle East and Africa, and what's been really interesting to see is that within the GCC or within the UAE specifically, there's a lot of government enablement around sort of digital adoption and supporting healthcare providers to integrate digital solutions. And for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, where we also invest, it's almost that digital health is really trying to bridge the public provision gap where the private sector has had to step in. So it's really interesting, and to the point you were discussing earlier, how the private and public sector are collaborating here very closely to sort of change patient outcomes. The second piece is that we operate in a market where there's higher purchasing power and very high insurance penetration, which means that a lot of consumers in this market are very willing to and eager to adopt healthcare technology and have that sort of improve their quality of life. So I think one of the conversations that I'm sure has been really topical, and it's more part of global trends, is Gen Z and millennials, the next generation of healthcare consumers, just don't want to access healthcare perhaps the same way as previous generations have, right? And I think there's a lot more around sort of patient centricity, around owning your own data, around really understanding what's important to you. And if you see businesses in the US like Row Health and Hims and Hers, it's a lot more about the patient being the center of the healthcare journey. And I think that the UAE as a market is really well set up for that. So whether that's through the adoptions and usage of wearables, and then the data you can collect, and then also how that data is used along your care journey, I think what we are going to see over the next sort of couple of years is really just like how patients will be empowered to use their own data, how there'll be clarity to the point that Dr. Mohamad made around like who's paying and why they're paying and how much things cost, and then also just like facilitated by the government, like I guess like how number one, patient data is protected, but how generally that data is used and transferred across various healthcare providers to give the most seamless healthcare experience.
Thank you, Sacha. Well, you brought up a number of really good points there. But I'm just going to pick up on the difference between consumers and patients of this market versus elsewhere. The fact that consumers here are a lot younger, they're a lot tax savvy, they're very open to technology and the use of technology. And as you mentioned, there was so much apps and different applications that came about during COVID. So my question to you, Dr. Sadyk, is based on what we know of this region and the opportunities in the ecosystem, what health tech apps or investments do you see are most relevant to this region? Because there's so much out there. And also, how do we engage the patients and the process to ensure that there's enough adoption of these technologies?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for your very important question. First of all, I want to mention that the health tech industry moved from a growth at all cost era to clear value creation, and where you improve the clinical health outcomes, access, and affordability. If we look at the most funded startups in MENA region, it would be appointment management platforms, telemedicine, marketplaces for healthcare providers, virtual pharmacies, and of course, health insurance. In Genome, we believe in future growth of already well-established trends in digital health. I mean at-home tests, remote care, and AI solutions. And I can name three major reasons for this. First one is that point of care keeps shifting to wherever the patient is. The second one would be that predictive analytics using AI, computer vision technologies, and chatbots, they became, a part of everyday routine clinical practice. But I want to make a note that AI will not replace the physician, but physicians using AI will replace those who don't. And the third point is at-home lab tests. Everyone using it. Pregnancy tests, diabetes, CGMs, COVID-19 tests. There are myriads of them. Finally, I would like also to emphasize the femtech field, because it's now on the VC radar too. Just imagine 20% of all global health tech funding go to female-funded companies. In my opinion, this is undervalued segment and needs more attention. First of all, because female funders, they have more, I would say, personal and profound understanding of women's health and women's special needs. And in conclusion, you mentioned the involvement of the patients. Empowering patients is a key. We should all work in this direction, and we should shift paradigm from reactive healthcare to proactive healthcare. And major key stakeholders in this process, I think it's regulators, health authorities, pharma companies, and of course, medical doctors and physicians. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sadyk. You emphasized quite passionately the bit around the relationship with physicians and their role in the future, that is not going away. And so is the physical hospital. We talk a lot about virtual hospitals and telehealth and remote care, etc. But the physical environment will continue to be there. So my question to you, Sacha, is how do we integrate the offline and the online delivery side of healthcare to create a more coordinated pathway for the patient and a much more seamless experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the favorite things I've ever heard someone say is you can't leapfrog a hospital. So similar to the point I was making previously, telehealth was extremely useful during COVID because it's incredibly easy to diagnose COVID over video conferencing. It is very difficult to diagnose many other illnesses over video conferencing. So what you would see is, the physician would ask a couple of questions and then say, okay, I need you to come in because I don't really understand what's going on with you. There's something obviously inherently physical about physical illness, which is what takes you to a hospital or to a point of care. And I think that sort of what we are seeing and what we've seen, across our own portfolio companies is we will migrate towards more of a hybrid, right? So there's a continuous monitoring. There's certain non-communicable diseases that are chronic that can be managed more in an online manner. But then in terms of sort of, some of the more serious issues or the deeper diagnostics that are needed, you're always going to need to have a place to administer healthcare or a point of care. I think sort of what could and might change with the use of data or with access to more patient data could be, I think we discussed this before, this was the gatekeeper of healthcare, sort of the primary care person who can sort of direct and manage patient outcomes before it involves going to multiple specialists, right? So that can keep things a bit more online. We've seen, there's a continuous glucose monitoring that you can do at home for diabetic patients. There's the at-home urine testing to see if you have any deficiencies. There's the at-home diagnostics, point-of-care devices that you can use, like, within your house to figure out your basic blood markers, etc. And I think perhaps like using those devices or the availability of those devices a little bit more within our markets will allow patients to avoid having to go back into the doctor So often video conferencing is great if you have done some bloods and need your results and don't need to go to the point of care. So I think to the point I made earlier, it's just going to be a lot more trying to create a seamless experience, leveraging the information you have available and really getting people comfortable with the switch from online to offline and then having access to their information to manage their healthcare journey in that way.
Thank you, Sacha. Dr. Mohamad, back to you. Continuing of the whole concept of integration, but I'll get into the cost side of things as well, because that's my favorite area, my favorite topic. So very related to the integrated care models, you see a lot more movement towards accountable care organization, managed care type structures, which requires some consolidation between different types of facilities so that you can cover the entire continuum of care. What's the role of private investors in pushing towards better integration?
Great, thank you. On this one specifically, I think there are so many buzzwords that we just need to address. We talk about predictive healthcare, about accountable care, about value-based healthcare. All of these sound great. I could name no model in the world that has succeeded in delivering all of them so far, unless you could. And the reason for that is it is being approached in silos. Private investors are approaching it on one hand, public sector players are approaching it completely separately and disintegrated. And to the points made earlier about adopting technology and making it work, the adoption is not only the adoption of the patient to such solutions. It is really the adoption of the key stakeholders, starting with the payers and subsequently the providers. There's a clear misalignment of incentives in trying to deliver such a model of care. So today the private sector, as a private investor, we'd like to approach such things and such concepts in a consortium that includes multiple stakeholders. You cannot just approach it as a VC investor or as a private equity investor. You need to really understand where are the efforts of the regulator being put, where are the policymakers drafting policies and guidelines. One thing is to invest in a company in the US, but another thing is to commercialize it in Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Saudi. So it is very important as a private investor to take all of these factors into account before we look at an investment. And a point to be made here is, we as Amanat, while we are by and large a private equity investor, we invest in infrastructure, we targeted long-term care and rehab, completely underserved at the time in Abu Dhabi and continues to be underserved in the region as sectors to tap into. We recently started looking at health tech and med tech. And the objective is the capital that flows usually from the GCC into the rest of the world to invest in companies around the world need to pay back this region. And the way to pay it back is by strategically partnering with these innovators around the world and allowing them to scale back to the region. And this is how we, as a private investor, approach investment in these spaces.
Yes, we can talk about ACOs probably on a separate panel for days and days. I mean, there are some interesting examples from all around the world, but it takes a lot of effort, as you said, to align the providers with the patients, with the regulators and payers to be able to deliver in such systems. Just going back to the value point or the point around cost, new models of care, funding new models of care focuses a lot on payment for value, which is delivering better outcomes at a lower cost. What role do you play in supporting the assets that you invest in deliver better value and deliver more efficiently?
I can tell you as a responsible investor in a healthcare sector, we have one main KPI eventually, which is patient satisfaction. That comes first and last. And if you put that on the forefront, all patient outcomes and all other metrics flow or cascade down from such a metric. So when we think of a value-based healthcare, we try to ensure we invest in institutions that have the right caliber of talent, the right caliber of global standards and clinical protocols to be adopted that allows us to grow such institutions while delivering high quality healthcare. In order, however, to your point, for a value-based model to be applied, this is not up to the private sector really. Today, again, going back to the initial question you asked me, the collaboration between the public and the private is now more important than ever because the public sector today has a role to play to ensure what are the clinical outcomes or the value-based outcomes that are required and requested from any provider or healthcare provider, ensuring that the various stakeholders, be it insurance companies, device manufacturers, and investors, can coordinate to deliver such a model. I don't think we are close to that model. However, I would like to acknowledge the efforts being put in this region specifically to deliver that model and emphasize that this should be taking place in consultation with the private sector and in collaboration with the private sector.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamad. I agree there's a lot more to do on that front. Going back to you, Dr. Sadyk, and I want to shift a bit more into the biotech space. So as you know, the regulators in this region are focusing a lot on making Abu Dhabi, UAE, and also other parts of this region the hubs of biotech investments. Where do you see that going in the future, and what do you believe is the best model to fund such ventures?
Yeah, thank you. This is a very important topic and a big one you can talk about for hours, but I'll try to be concise. First of all, the COVID-19 revealed the great transformational potential of the UAE healthcare. And the vaccines were developed in 1 year and the regulatory approved them at incredible pace. In a short time, UAE became a major Middle East pharmaceutical hub and first Arab country to begin full cycle manufacturing of COVID vaccine. So it embraces the innovation in biotech and implements it very fast. So I think that the good idea would be to expand the portfolio of these vaccines because you already established these cold chain supply logistics, and it could work well for exports. You also mentioned the personalized medicine solutions, and we all witnessed this shift from evidence-based medicine, where you look for a reliable solution for the big group of patients, to more personalized solutions. And mostly it is very important in cancer, where the new molecules, they are adapted to specific mutations, and you have better outcomes when you do this genetic profiling of the tumor before starting the treatment. So the personalized medicine is a real trend, and in Angelica Ventures Biotech Fund, we're focused on this area. And finally, for another area for investment could be the solutions that can enhance the R&D process in biotech. I mean the AI platforms that help biotech companies to make a drug design and to simulate clinical trials. It can help to increase the probability of success and to make the innovational molecules go to market faster.
Thank you, Dr. Sadyk. I think we're running out of time. I mean, the biotech space is definitely one to keep an eye out on, because there's going to be so much happening there. Do we have time to take any questions from the audience? Perhaps one question in the front, if someone can please pass the mic.
So just with regards to your investment targets, what kind of companies do you invest in? Seed stage, C-suite, or which level of maturity do you invest in? If that's something you're interested in. My second question is, what about people that don't have access to healthcare even as a technology? So war zones, borderlines. What is your interest in that area? And especially when it comes to SDG and sustainability and all of that, is that on your agenda? Thank you.
That's a lot of questions.
Let's pick one.
Yeah. But I think just for context, so we invest in Series A, B companies that have achieved product market fit and then are looking to scale, so early growth. And then in terms of sort of healthcare provision, we invest across the Middle East and Africa, I think, as I mentioned earlier in the panel. And I think one of the things that we discussed was the healthcare provision challenges that tech is solving in this part of the world are very different to what we're seeing in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, right? Here we're seeing a lot more about seamless healthcare integration, 100% insurance penetration. People have the ability to spend out of pocket on preventative health care and well-being, and then have access to some of the best doctors in the world with a very active and involved government, right? In sub-Saharan Africa, technology is bridging the gap between whether or not somebody gets to see a doctor in the first place. And while the number of doctors to 1,000 people in this region is still below the OECD average, it's nowhere near as low as it is in places in Africa, right? So I think we are very interested to invest in those markets where it makes sense. And I think, to your point, we see it really as the opportunity for, the 0 to 1 opportunity, which is someone who previously wouldn't have had access to healthcare suddenly gets access to it on the cost quality nexus that Dr. Mohamad was talking about as well.
Thank you, Sacha. I think we're going to wrap up. A huge thank you to each and every one of you and to the audience for your attention. Feel free to continue these conversations throughout the rest of the conference today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.